Hi, I'm Ruth Legare. I'm from Ireland. I'm an SFAI water rights resident. I'm here until the end of November. And my work revolves around water and its memory. I make remedies from water and for water. So I hold remedy sessions with bodies of water. And then I also make remedies from certain places. So I have a large water collection from Irish lakes, rivers, waterfalls, puddles, and also different people's tears and Arctic icebergs, water from the Baltic Sea, and now I'm here. Next slide, please, Robert. So I use processes of homeopathy in order to make the remedies, and part of that process is the more you dilute something, the stronger it gets, which is kind of counterintuitive to most of us. Using this process of serial dilution, the water samples become little tiny poetic time machines where what is held within the water is released and kind of expanded, and these stories that it holds. So I'm really interested in the hidden things in this transparent medium, the chemical things that are hidden in the water, and also its alchemical properties. Next slide, please. In 2012, I decided if I was really going to explore water and its memories, that I was going to look for what I described as the more primal purity in water. So I decided to go to the Arctic and explore icebergs. I spent 3 weeks upon a tall ship, and we traveled around Svalbard and Spitsbergen, and I explored icebergs from their macro and the micro and macro forces of the icebergs, the glaciers, and the seas. I created a set of 11 remedies from here, but my intention in the beginning was always to make works for water and for people second. So this is a remedy, and I always return the remedies in a frozen form that's made from an iceberg, and I was just about to return it to the sea. Next slide, please. This is the same remedy in this sphere that's under a microscope. So this is the Magdalena remedy. This is one of my favorite remedies that I've made, and the iceberg remedies are really interesting. They hold space for you, and they allow whatever it is that your own innate healing is, it needs to take place to happen. And it's a really gentle and subtle, but it shifts a huge amount from different layers of your being. It also works with critical thinking and releases what is held in the brainstem in the back of your mind that might turn into these repeated thoughts. And it's also really good for therapists and counselors and anyone who does any sort of energy work or works with people. These kind of people can pick up dark energy sometimes from time to time, and this kind of allows people doing this work to bring the light they carry through with a great certainty and strength. Next slide, please. After I did this Arctic work and was exploring these waters, the Center of Contemporary Art in Gdansk invited me to come and explore the waters of Novi Port in Gdansk. This is a very polluted place. It's also where World War II started. And this was a big shift in my practice, because before I would have looked for the very primal places, these very pure springs or icebergs. And here with these waters, I thought that I would just maybe treat them with the iceberg waters or hold remedy sessions with them. And I ended up making a remedy from Novi Port, and it was a really pivotal point in my practice to look at polluted and waters that held a lot of trauma. The remedy that came from it is really light and bright and pink, and it really holds you like a hug. It's a really lovely remedy to take. And next slide, please. It works with releasing hard, heavy thought forms and brings a kind of light to maybe acknowledge a needing to control others, or maybe mind control programs. And it also works with people who have lost their homes or who are displaced in order to feel that sense of home in themselves. So this was really interesting me to discover that these places which you might think are polluted or destroyed or that we might turn our backs on actually hold a huge amount of light. And it's like that all this darkness that they've been through, that it's like this equal opposite light that really shines through. So now I'm here and far away from the sea that I've ever been. And I spent the last number of weeks out with the Land Arts program from UNM as their visiting artist. And we traveled to the Four Corners area and looked at the devastation from the fracking there. And I took samples from various sites. And also the San Juan River and all the pollution there from the mine spill. And it was very heavy and quite a difficult time connecting with the landscape in this place and seeing all the devastation that it brought to the place and the communities. So I'm going to spend the rest of my time here at SFAI making remedies from these places, and I'm really intrigued to see what their potential will be. So that's all for now, to try and squish it in very quickly, but please come and talk to me afterwards. And also I'm going to be holding remedy sessions in the gallery at SFAI all next week. If anyone would like to come and work with either the iceberg waters or the waters from the lakes and rivers in Ireland. Thanks.
Thank you. Hello everyone. Thank you so much for coming out here in the morning on a Friday morning. I want to thank SFAI for having us make these presentations and the New Mexico Museum of History. It's really nice to be here today. And I just want to say that I had the pleasure of experiencing a water remedy with Ruth, and it was a wonderful experience. We've been at the Institute together, so it's been great. So my name is Christine Howard Sandoval, and I come from New York City, but both sides of my family are from New Mexico, so it's kind of been a dream of mine to come back here and make artwork and reconnect with my family history. So this first slide, I'm just going to briefly talk about. It was a kind of a groundbreaking project for me. I do sculpture and walking performances, and I use wearable cameras to walk through landscapes that have been transgressed or compromised by over-industrialization or climate change issues. And this project was made in a burn scar in Colorado, southern Colorado, which is basically an extension of this landscape, high desert area, the Sangre de Cristo mountain range. And so I went there, and I have a process, kind of a field work process, where I interview local people about the stories of the site. Related in this particular project, it was interviews about their relationship to drought and climate change and their visions of future. And then I do these walks that kind of give me a sense of the materiality that I want to work with, but also a kind of sense of the geography and the landscape there. So if you want to go to the next slide. So then I did, this particular site is what's called a wildland human interface. So it's a place where development is kind of interfacing and impinging on wildland, which has been identified as a real problematic kind of zone. And I was interested kind of formally as an artist in these interfaces and what happens when there's something like a fire or a major event that transgresses this boundary. And so I started to research the history of suburban design, which goes all the way back to post-World War II. And I took these schematics of suburban design, and they were also related back to the history of decorative arts, and an artist you guys might know named William Morris, who's a wallpaper designer. And he bases his designs on hexagonal schematics. So with the belief that these hexagonal schematics create a sense of balance and synthesis. And so the designers that incorporated his designs and applied it to real space and the way people live also believed that these kind of geometric parallel hexagonal designs would also invoke a sense of harmony within the environment and within the communities. And I was interested in kind of the failure of that belief system, that it had nothing to do with the community and it had nothing to do with the way people were relating, but simply the way that they were organized spatially. So I created, it's tough to see in this image, but basically these pieces of paper are coated with carbon, they're sooted, and then the process of these diagrams are erased on the paper, and they're in, the scale is a wallpaper scale. And then the fragments of wood are pieced together and they're taken from the site where I did this walk. Next slide. And again, difficult to see, but this is a clearing that happened in the site. So all of the, and it's funny that we have this controlled burn in the watershed area. This morning I woke up smelling and thinking that maybe our building was on fire, so palpable. So everything was carbonized, and so they were clearing these trees which had been hollowed out from the heat of the fire. And I just found that this pile, I took several photographs of it, panoramic photographs, and then pieced them together for an installation I did in the East Coast. Next slide. So then I kind of go back and forth between making work about the waterways in New York City, which I focus mostly on the waterfront, but also there's a super fun site called the Gowanus Canal, which you probably are all very familiar with, potentially. And I had a chance to collaborate with a group called the Canary Project, who are based in Syracuse, New York, and they brought in incredible body professionals that we were able to research through. So we were speaking with NASA, we were speaking with the head of the Superfund project for this particular project, and also neighborhood developers and people who live in the neighborhood. And at the time that we did this project, it was an interesting moment because they were talking about remediation. There's never been a Superfund site that's been designated completed in the United States yet. It used to be funded through federal funds. Now it's funded through your tax dollars. And so it's a really important time to pay attention to how the government is remediating these old industrial sites. And in this case, the Gowanus Canal is almost mythological in its effects because it's so polluted that the idea of even touching. Do you want to try to play the video? So I have a quick 2-minute clip of this video that it's a 2-channel video, and I was really interested in this sense of danger in terms of touching it and the relationship of the body to the body of water. And so the right channel is taken from, I took a canoe down the canal and I dropped a camera to the bottom of the waterbed, and I filmed the edges, the hard edges of the canal. My camera wound up, the camera body wound up disintegrating, and I had to get a new one. But I still have the footage, which is really hard to see. It requires probably a completely dark room. And then the channel on the left is me wearing a camera and essentially breaking into the industrial zone there and walking the boundary of the canal, kind of testing and teasing and flirting with this idea of touching this incredibly toxic body of water. And for this project, when we were meeting with these researchers, I met a hydrologist who was personally intersected between working with the developers, working with the Superfund site, and also he owns property there, so he lives in the neighborhood. He's got these three really embedded characteristics. So I interviewed him at length about his work and his vision of the future of this site, and the subtext that you probably can't make out in this light is taken from his interview. I think we should probably go to the next slide. Okay, so the project that I'm doing here brings me back to the history of my family, who lived in a very small village called El Llanito, which is in between Algodones and Bernalillo. And my mother grew up with the acequia, and this is her walking the acequia. She came to visit me while I was doing my project, and we went back there and tried to locate the old farmland that my grandmother owned. And the only way that we could find it was because of the acequia. Everything has changed. There's no farmland there anymore. Completely modern houses. And this is her walking up the edge of the acequia. And I came to this project mostly interested in the communities and the stewardship that is exemplified by the acequia communities. Next slide. And then I created a 25-foot long cast adobe channel. So this piece is cast in 5-foot sections outdoors. I've been working outside the whole time, which is how I prefer to work. And the channel is just a sculpture that plays off of the idea of a pipeline, plays off the channeling of water, it plays off the channeling of energy in some sense, and it also captures the same perspective as my video, which is a downward gaze. So this sculpture will be installed with a 3-channel video that I've been filming in the village of Agua Fria. And so I've been doing the walking videos there. I'll be going back tonight. I leave tomorrow morning. And so I've been really choreographed by this place, and I keep going back, and there's something new that happens every single time, and I hope to continue this project through the next year and keep coming back. It's been incredibly generative, and amazing landscape to work in. Okay, thank you.
My name is Catherine Paige Harris, and I teach at the University of New Mexico, in Albuquerque, and I wanted to say that you guys probably don't know this, but as a resident who's a person who doesn't live in the site, I don't get to meet the residents except through Facebook, because we have this lovely Facebook page. So it was really thrilling to actually have a conversation through this medium with Ruth and with Christine, because otherwise I would never really get to see you until I'm officially a resident, as it were, in the spring, but I always start early with stuff. So here I am early. Anyway, so I kind of edited a bunch of stuff down so that I could talk about this theme of transparency a little bit and sort of use it as a way to frame this work that I've been doing for the last few years and the work that I'm putting together for this residency. So next slide. So trans is through, and next slide. Pare, to appear, so to appear through, next slide. To appear through, to shine through, transparencia. And transparencia is old medieval Latin, and it brought me to think about the ways in which my work gets mediated and the ways in which I use a version of transparency, the version of to shine through, to see through, to present through various media, the kinds of unmediated experiences that I kind of go out and have and then try to recreate or represent for audiences, hopefully, who might be interested. Next slide. So trans has been an interesting syllable for me. because I've been working with trans species, an idea that I was on a field trip with Andrea Poli, this amazing artist who also teaches at UNM right now, and she said, "Say, what would you do for a sub-theme for wilderness, machine wilderness, the Isaiah conference in Albuquerque?" And I was like, "Oh, trans species habitat." And she's like, "What's that?" And so I ended up with this sub-theme that was around the idea of essentially designing cities and spaces that human beings live in to allow for habitat and to actually maybe even switch the primacy of who's on top, whose city is it. And so that's where trans species started to come from for me. I thought I invented it. I definitely did not. There are many people who have been inspecting this idea from all sorts of different aspects, and one of them in particular psychology. So if you look at it in great detail, there's an amazing book by Gabe Bradshaw, which is called Elephants on the Edge, which is about sort of looking at trans-species psychology and how our brains work. And there's also a huge body of literature in law. I happen to teach in landscape architecture as well as in the art and ecology program, so I'm interested in how this plays out in design. So the first kind of foray into this for me was this table, which I'm showing because it literally pierces through a window. So this was shown up at Highlands University in their art gallery, and the idea was food for students. Students are always hungry, right? So food for students on the inside, and they ate all of it before I got there to photograph it. So you can see the like measly little apples that are left, even though I left them like a whole bushel. Anyway, and then outside was food for the animals. So there was seeds that were local that animals could eat. And the idea was to literally make it so that we could all sit at the same table. And that metaphor, so next slide, became something that's kind of been driving the last few years of my work. That piece I published in a little article for an online magazine called Arid Lands, and this woman from Rancho Cucamonga called me up and said, "We love your piece, but we can only ship things that fit in FedEx art boxes and are light. So would you happen to be able to make us something that could fit in a FedEx art box and would be light enough?" And I was like, wow, well, how about laminated cardboard? So these are laminated cardboard, recycled cardboard tables. And at the time, so I went through this little moment where our dog was in trouble with the city of Albuquerque, and I thought potentially they were going to take away the dog. And so I sort of set up this last meal with my dog, whom I love very much. And so we shared this last meal, and I videoed it because I'm an artist, and you know, why let up the opportunity go? So I posted it on Facebook, and this friend of mine who lives in LA got in touch with me and said, "If you ever want to eat with my chickens, you know, I have these chickens." And I said, "Great, I would love to eat with your chickens." And then the woman from Rancho Cucamonga called up and I said, "Hey, Lee, I've got an opportunity. Does your chicken want to come to the Wignall Museum and eat with me?" So this is Nina, and this is the watermelon that was grown in Nina's yard. And next slide. Here we are sharing watermelon together. I have to say that these experiences as represented, I think they do generate a fair amount of humor and there's sort of joyfulness and lightness. It's an incredibly intense and beautiful experience. We really, Nina and I had this extraordinary connection across this sharing of food and me learning her ways of speaking to me, essentially, and my being able to communicate with her and making her feel comfortable in this situation where there are all these people wandering around. It's an opening, you know, there are teenagers and children and all kinds of characters. And we had a lovely hour-long, you know, sort of feeling together. Next. As preparation for this, I had had meals with Tilly the cow, Mo the horse, Tula the goat, and a bunch of turkeys whose name are officially Thanksgiving, sadly. Anyway, and this is a video that you can't really see very clearly, but I put those videos in these lenses underneath some of the ceramic bowls. So some of the bowls are true, like you can put food in them, and some of them have video in them. Next, and that's a close-up. So that's Tilly the cow, and Tilly was actually, she produces calves that go to be slaughtered for meat, and she was the most distrusting animal I had a meal with in the course of 2 years, and I couldn't blame her one bit, honestly. Next. These are stills. And then this is the other aspect from which I videoed those meals, which was underneath the meal, so that you could get the viewpoint of the animal themselves eating. And that will come up later. So there you go. I ended up taking, I'm not going to show you because this is supposed to be short. I then took my entire family on bicycles through Denmark. If you want to talk to me later about what it's like to have a 6-year-old riding a bicycle in the freezing wind for many, many miles when he's not very happy about it. Yeah, I can just preview that for you. Don't do it. Anyway, so I took my family on this month-long trip related to the Land Shape Festival that was in Hanstholm, Denmark. And then we ended up at a family residency in Vermont at the Marble House Project and did a series of tables and meals at all of those places with some amazing farmers who let us live in their houses and sort of quasi-woof for 2 days, and then we built a table and then we had a meal. It was an amazing experience. And I came back to Santa Fe. I had this chance to recreate that experience with a series of meals within the landmark show that CCA did. So this is the bee performance. Next. And then this is this aspect in which this came into being, transparency. So these are transparent modules that I ended up creating so that the people wouldn't be afraid of the bees and the bees wouldn't get harmed by the people. Next. And so they formed a shield around the beehives. Next. So that the bees themselves could be happy during their residency at CCA. Next. So these are just shots. I brought food and there was external. Next. And then an internal installation, so with video. Next. So I came from this transspecies idea to a post-human idea, post-humanism. And post-humanism has given me this sort of framework to kind of keep working on this work and sort of thinking about how to expand it. Next. I did a meal with turkeys. There's Thanksgiving. And we shared Thanksgiving with 4 turkeys who were being not slaughtered while their conifers were being slaughtered on that Saturday. I hope some of you might have even joined in. Next. And I used the same modules in order to make a kind of division between entering the space and being outside of the space. Next. So that the turkeys, who did occasionally want to escape, would not. Go ahead. Next. Next. There was food during the entire installation. Next. And this is another post-humanist, Carrie Wolf, who thinks about the idea of hospitality and responsibility. And I think that's what leads me to the water rights work. Next. And this project is called Sharing a Drink. And it has to do with this, the Universal Declaration of Animal Rights. Any act compromising the survival of wild species and any decision leading such an act is tantamount to genocide, as UNESCO has stated. So there are even legal constructs that look at our relationships to land, next, in relationship to species. So this is Cochiti, which you all probably recognize. And I've chosen to represent it with sort of aerial shots here, and then this is the area below the dam, and this is the area that I'm interested in kind of looking at in terms of design, with the premise that maybe the dam will disappear. Next slide. Next. And you can't see this very clearly, unfortunately, but the ways that I'm going to look at intervening in this landscape is to take the forms of our mouths as we drink water, and then think about those as landscape forms. So we could just scoot through these next slides. This is an image of me drinking water. Here's my mouth and how it hardly moves as the water gets sucked down. And then these are stills from video of my dog. He comes back. He hasn't died. Drinking water. Thank you.